The title of my talk is An Authentic Heretic. And after I gave that title, I started to think about what that meant, what it would mean to be an authentic heretic. And I think we all have a sense of what authentic means. That it means true. Something is authentic when it's true. When it's applied to oneself, it means something like being true to yourself. And this is used in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Right? It's Polonius who says, "To thine own self be true." Interesting thing about that is Polonius is a bit of a goof. I don't really know that much about Shakespeare. I'm sure that some of you know a lot more than I do. But I always kind of wondered about whether or not Shakespeare was endorsing that, because he certainly doesn't endorse everything that Polonius says and does. And there's a sense in which that idea that, to your own self, to thine own self be true, I don't know. There's something about it that seems right. And then there's the question, what if you're a jerk? I don't know. You don't really want to be true to yourself. It seems like what you should do is try to change yourself, right? Try to change yourself in accord with the good. We don't say of people who are, maybe we do a little bit, but I'm always puzzled by it. We say things like, well, that person has these terrible views and they're kind of a bad person, but at least they're honest about it and forthright, and they are who they are. And I kind of want to say, really? That's a good thing? It seems like it'd be better to keep that sort of down low and try to change it if you can, not really to sort of embrace it, right? So anyway, authenticity, I'm not so sure sometimes. Being a heretic, I think, is even a little bit more puzzling, at least for us, because, a heretic is just somebody who commits heresy. And you want to know, well, what's a heresy? And it's a claim at variance with Christian orthodoxy. And then you want to know, well, what's Christian orthodoxy? And this is all stuff Google's telling me, so I figure it's probably right. That Christian orthodoxy is Christian doctrine as determined by an ecclesiastical authority. Now we could ask how that authority is determined. Why, for example, it's not just a matter of power, why it's genuine authority. But this is already to have gone too far, I think, because none of us really think of ourselves as heretics. And I think that's not just because no one has ever, I think, really thought of themselves as a heretic, because the label gets applied to those other people, the people who believe the stuff that's not the orthodox stuff. You know what I'm saying? So the people who were called heretics, they didn't think of themselves as putting forward heresies. They thought they were putting forward solid doctrine, right? And it just turns out that, according to the ecclesiastical authority, they weren't. But I don't think that's the only reason that we don't think of ourselves as heretics, or most people don't. It's rather because I think that people don't think of themselves as heretics because they don't really care about being in line with Christian orthodoxy. In fact, I think that when you call yourself a heretic, if you I don't know, you don't have cards or anything, we don't have cards in the Heretics Club. If you're a card-carrying member of the Heretics Club, you would be so as a way of saying that you don't care about orthodoxy, right? I have a good friend who said he wanted to be here and couldn't. I don't know whether that's true or not. But he said, he'd love to hear my talk about heresy and heretics because he's such a heretic that he needs an exorcism. That's supposed to be kind of funny, I guess. I don't know. I know you're all eating. I mean, it's like dinner theater here. Because that's when I come. I'm eating my food and stuff like that. I don't know. There's some buzzing going on in the back, so I'm not going to be throwing any stones or picking out any specks in anybody's eyes. But in any case, he said, I'm such a heretic, I need an exorcism. And the idea was, thanks. I'm gonna laugh on the second time. And the idea was, that it's funny because, and I laughed, we all laughed, it was kind of funny. But I guess I do think that it's possible to be an authentic heretic today. It's just that in the case of all genuine heresies, to do so is costly, I think. Now, how can I think that there can be heretics if I've said that we, in general, maybe at Colgate and the modern university, we don't really care that much about Christian orthodoxy, Well, I think it's because while we don't care about Christian orthodoxy, we do care about orthodoxy. And orthodoxy, again, Google tells me, can be taken to mean authorized or generally accepted theory, doctrine, or practice. So then the question is, are there authorized or generally accepted beliefs at Colgate or in the modern university more generally? Well, Barry Weiss, this columnist at the New York Times, seems to think so. She wrote an op-ed published yesterday for the New York Times called "We're All Fascists Now." And in it, she addressed the latest incident of no platforming a speaker, one in which Christina Hoff Sommers, who'd been invited to speak at the law school of Lewis and Clark College, was shouted down. And here's what Weiss says about this. You can actually see the video. You know, there's this video of Christina Hoff Sommers, and she's started talking along, and then like people come in. It's peaceful and everything. And they sing a song about not giving fascist platforms. It's kind of like a nice little song. But you know, I think in the end she wasn't able to speak. I didn't watch the whole video. But here's what Barry Weiss says. She says, Christina Hoff Sommers is a self-identified feminist and registered Democrat with a PhD in philosophy and a wicked sense of humor. She's also a woman who says bad things. Things like, men and women are equal, but there are differences between them. Or, the gender gap in STEM fields isn't simply the result of sexism. Or, contrary to received wisdom, the American school system actually favors girls, not boys. So then here are some possible heresies. I don't know if these are heresies. Like, I don't know if they go against what's generally accepted in the modern university or at Colgate, because I don't know what's generally accepted at Colgate. I'm not really a student. I'm not really in the mix of things. But you know, that men and women are equal, but there are differences between them. Or the gender gap in STEM fields isn't simply the result of sexism. Or contrary to received wisdom, the American school system actually favors girls, not boys. One might add to this list things not endorsed, as far as I know, by Sommers, but by other people who you might think would be unwelcome in the academy, at least with respect to these views. Here's a potential heresy, that immigration laws should be enforced, or that diversity initiatives should be replaced by affirmative action plans aimed at justice for African Americans, or that abortion is morally impermissible and should be illegal. These, it seems like, have a better shot at being heresies. No, I bring them up not to endorse them, definitely not. I do so only to point out what it would take to be an authentic heretic in the modern university. Now, these are difficult issues and uncomfortable to discuss, and if some bearded white guy stood before you in a lunch talk to tell you what he thinks about them, the whole thing might get really cringy really quick. So instead, I want to talk about sex. Oh my gosh, that is funny. I had a note. I took it out. I'm glad I took it out. It said, "Wait for laughs." And I'm glad to see it turns out I didn't need that. Okay, but to get there, to be able to talk about sex, I need to talk about God first. So you can look on the bright side. That's slightly less embarrassing than sex. I've said that there are that maybe there are heresies in the modern university. I think actually that some of them that I haven't talked about are things that are part of Christian orthodoxy. So what one might have held back in the day in order to avoid being a heretic vis-a-vis Christianity might make one a heretic vis-a-vis the modern university. So here's one. Christ has provided the unique way to salvation. Here's another. Being a good person requires belief in God. Now you might think that that last one is just obviously false, right? Because you might think it's obvious that there are good people who don't believe in God. In fact, it seems like that is obvious. I guess I'd say that. Now look, not all people who believe in God are good people, but that's irrelevant to the claim. It's supposed to be a claim about a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. You know, the book of James says, you believe in God, good, so do the demons, and they tremble, right? But let's say that people, I think it is true people can be good without believing in God, Though here's something that such a person can't do, a person who doesn't believe in God. They can't be grateful to God. They can't lovingly obey God. They can't praise God. These are things that are obligatory, I think, if there is a God. It seems reasonable to think that if there is a being who's the creator of everything ex nihilo, that these are things that would be obligations. So if there is a God, there are some aspects of being a good person that are not open to those who don't believe in God. Those things, being grateful to God, lovingly obeying God, praising God, only make sense if you think there's a God. Okay, you might say. But the whole point is that people who don't believe in God don't think there's a God. That's the whole point. But we might ask, are there other things that we take to be important to being a good person that somehow involve belief in God? Here's one that I think. I think that moral egalitarianism, the belief that every human being has great and equal moral dignity, makes sense only on a theistic picture. That is, I kind of think that it's only if you believe in God that moral egalitarianism makes sense. And I'm not going to talk about that today because I'm going to talk about that in my humanities talk on March 20th. So mark your calendars for more hilarity, if you can stand that. But today I want to talk about sex. So here we go. James, James is going to walk right through. He's out. See you, James. Good to see you, man. Came in the right time. Let's see. Well, Christian Orthodoxy regards sex as a big deal. Indeed, that's why a lot of people are glad to kick it to the curb. That is, Christian Orthodoxy, not sex. That's a funny sentence the way I wrote it. It can seem like Christians have an unhealthy obsession with sex. Christianity teaches that in sexual union, separate persons become one flesh. They become united. I was tempted there to add not just bodily, but spiritually. But Christian Orthodoxy considers the body to be holy. The idea that only the spirit or soul is significant is a tenet of Gnosticism, which is itself a heresy. So sex is a big deal for Christian Orthodoxy. Now, as I said, this regard for sex might itself be seen as a heresy in the modern university. Actually, I don't know if I said that. It seems obsessive and excessive and somehow unhealthy. If there is an Orthodox position in the modern university, and I don't know if there is, and this is like speculation. Like I honestly don't know. Like if this is like the general, certainly it's not written down somewhere or anything like that. But if this is the general view, but it kind of seems, just by watching the TV and getting on the internets, that it seems to be that sex is a big deal only if you make it a big deal. If you regard it as a recreational activity, then for you that's what it is. Right? There's nothing intrinsic to sex that makes it important or special or something like that. But I think we actually do think that sex is intrinsically important. And that for all the bluster in popular culture, I think that it's not. That is, that sex isn't important or somehow special. I think we all actually do. I think like even people in the wider, I think people do think it's important. Even though they kind of say that it's not, and they kind of say, well, hey, if you regard it as recreation, then for you it's just recreation. I don't think people actually believe that. It's funny, I was talking to my kids once, and I was telling them, that I'm saying that, I kind of think that sex, I want you to know that I kind of think it's a big deal, and, that I'm giving them this sort of view, and my poor daughter was like, she's older than, she was, 15 or something like that. She was trying to like physically make herself disappear into the couch. Like she was pushing herself back into the couch cushions, trying to like get behind them so she would dissipate, right? So she wouldn't be there anymore. My son, who was like 10, 11 or something like that, he was like, he's like bopping along, kind of listening to me. And so I said, you're going to get all these messages from the culture that like if you're not having lots of sex all the time, that like there's somehow something wrong with you. But like I don't think you should like buy that. And he said, yeah, Dad, I really think that's right. And because, if you have sex with lots of different people, you could get a bad back. No, I messed up the punchline. You can really hurt your back. I was like, it's among the reasons. Maybe you're not kind of there with me yet, but another good reason. Yes, there are many good reasons. So, yeah, isn't that funny? So, okay, now I'm gonna move into stuff that's a little bit like, a little bit more difficult to talk about, because I think that to see that we all kind of think that it is kind of important, or that there's something intrinsic about sex, we need to talk about something difficult that we all rightly consider to be really bad, sexual coercion. And I'm not just talking about sexual assault, which is obviously deeply abhorrent, right? Like it's deeply abhorrent, and obviously so. I'm talking about like pressuring someone into sex if they're reluctant. That may not be illegal, but I take it that we all think that that's really bad, and that it's potentially it's potentially at least a really serious violation of a person's integrity. I don't want to talk about it necessarily, but that is the whole Aziz Ansari case. Kind of like brings this whole thing up. I'm not gonna, if you know what that is, then you know what it is, and all that stuff. And you see that there's a Saturday Night Live sketch where they're trying to talk about it, and it's hard to talk about the whole thing. But in any case, let me just say, there's no question about the badness of sexual assault, and there's no question about the badness of sexual coercion. What I want to think about is why sexual coercion is bad. And you might think that's just obvious, that it's an issue of consent, that the person initially did not consent and then did consent, if at all, due to being pressured. And that's definitely one of the things that's bad about sexual coercion. Like, undoubtedly, that is one of the things that's bad about it. But I don't think we think that it's the only thing that's bad about it. The reason is that there are lots of cases where someone doesn't initially consent to something, is pressured to do it, does it, and we think the whole thing's fine. Maybe you've made tea for me, right? You've made me tea. And I say I don't want tea. Some of you have seen this video. Now look, you shouldn't force me to drink tea. But now look, if we're really talking about tea, that's what we're talking about right now. We're talking about tea, right? We're talking about tea, okay? We're talking about tea. We're talking about like you boil the water, you put the, well, if you're sort of a cretin like me, you put the bag in, you don't have the tea leaves and stuff like that, and you pour it over and you make a cup of tea, okay? That's what we're talking about. If you've gone through all this trouble to make me tea, and I say I don't want tea, you shouldn't force me to drink the tea. But here, what do you think of this? What if you say to me, hey, you know what? I went through all this trouble to make you this tea. Would you drink the tea? In fact, I brought this back from England, and I was thinking of you when I bought it. In fact, you're the whole reason I bought the tea. Like, I wouldn't even have gotten this tea if it wasn't for you. So, like, can't you just take a sip? Like, just a sip? Is a sip going to kill you? Now, I don't think in the tea case, we're talking about tea. In the tea case, I don't think that anybody has done anything egregiously wrong. I could be wrong about that. I mean, I'm open to being disagreed with about that. I don't think they have. Doesn't seem like that's like a terrible thing. I don't know, like people do this to each other all the time. They're sort of saying like, oh, come on, come out to the movie. And they say, I don't really want to go to the movie. And you say, oh, come on, go to the movie. Like, I never want to go anywhere. Once I get home, I put on my pajamas and I'm home and I don't want to go anywhere. And people pressure me to do things sometimes. I'm like, sometimes I do it. And I almost always regret it. Because that's like, because then I was like, because that was time I could have spent at home in my pajamas. Amen. Thank you. But here's the thing. Like, that is just not the case when it comes to sex. right? So that video about tea and consent and all this sort of stuff, that video might be right about, like, I think it is right about, like, consent, right? But the analogy between tea and sex, that's no good, right? Because we don't think it works like that. We don't think that sex is like drinking tea. If we did, then I don't know that we would think that there was anything wrong with somebody saying, like, oh, come on, we've been dating for so long and blah, 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 or, we blah, 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 blah. Like, why can't you just blah, 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 blah. Like, we all kind of think, like, that's rotten. That's kind of skeezy. That's no good. It's creepy. It's terrible. Like, you can't do that. But you can do it with tea. So then, like, then I think, okay, then we don't think that sex is like nothing unless you make it something. Right? I guess that's what I think. Now, then the question is, then that means that the lack of consent isn't the only thing that's wrong with sexual coercion. It's one of the things that's wrong with sexual coercion, but it's not the only thing. There must be something about sex itself, it seems. But then what is it? Well, it's whatever makes sex different than drinking tea. I'm just drinking some tea here. It's good. Damn good tea, I got to tell you. Now, Christian Orthodoxy has some ideas about that, about like why I don't know if it's ever been codified, but why drinking tea is different than sex, right? Like lots of, not just Christian Orthodoxy, but like, religions, they kind of say stuff about this kind of thing, and they have their views about why that's kind of a special thing or whatever, right? And I'm not saying that you have to think that, right? You don't have to think that to think that it's special. That would be a crazy, it seems like that's a big argument. I wouldn't want to make that argument. But what I do think is that, like, if it's true that the modern sort of university takes as its sort of default position that, there's nothing special about sex, then I think that it has to kind of be wrong. And if sex is somehow special, then the dominant attitude in popular culture and maybe on campus, that is that it's no big deal, or it's a big deal only if you make it a big deal, it can't be right. Maybe that's the takeaway of the talk. If you're a sexual heretic in that you don't regard it as a recreational activity, like maybe you think that it is something that's important, maybe you're right, like maybe there's something to that. Like maybe just this. Maybe if you think like that, you shouldn't sort of be like, I'm not saying that you should go out and beat a drum or something like that and shout from the rooftops, but I'd also say, like, I wouldn't be ashamed of it. Like, I wouldn't sort of think to myself, oh, like I suck because I'm not having sex all the time with just people I'm hooking up with randomly or something like that. I'd say, like, I think you're probably, I think that you're probably acting on the belief that we all kind of have. Even people who don't profess any kind of religious adherence, that sex is kind of a big deal. And maybe if you think that, then maybe you are an authentic heretic. And I'll end there. Thanks very much.